Slightly different from Shrek, slightly different from Batman and from Narnia. Andrew, I'm very keen to know why this movie, what direction you're going to with your career.
Yeah, I'm keen to know what direction I'm going in the future as well. This movie, which I coincidentally, we talked last on Cirque du Soleil, and I actually made these films almost simultaneously. I was posting them both at the same time. I was going from the Mandarin Oriental in Las Vegas to a village in Papua New Guinea and really sort of being very confused about my own identity at the time. But, this was a book that just appealed on a number of levels. My wife had given it to me when I was finishing up Prince Caspian, and I read it on a flight between LA and London and landed in LA and chased the rights down because I just fell in love with the book. It resonated with me in terms of the fact that I grew up in Papua New Guinea. I knew the characters. And it resonated with me in terms of, somebody who's chosen to tell stories as a vocation. This was a book that was really about the power of story. And that's really why I made it. I mean, it just kind of connected on a personal level. And then it was a matter of just figuring out how to make it.
What do you think accounts for the eternal appeal of Great Expectations?
Well, Great Expectations is really, at its heart, a story about reinvention and about the ability to reinvent ourselves, not always for good. I mean, Pip, the character, reinvents himself several times and really goes down a wrong path. But I think the idea that we have a second chance, that we can rewrite our own story, that we can create our own story for ourselves, I think is a sort of a universally appealing theme.
The commander. This character seems like an educated, cultured man who is evil. Can you just tell us a bit about that character and the way it is portrayed on screen?
See, I don't think of, and the actor David, I think, did a wonderful job of the character, but I don't think of this commander as evil per se. And, I think the situation with a war, and a particular situation like this, which wasn't dissimilar from Vietnam, is that the soldiers on the ground had no reason to be there. They weren't fighting for their freedom. They weren't fighting for anything they believed in. They were fighting for commercial powers. And they were suffering just as much as the people they were fighting against. And in that situation, everyone is pushed to their limits. And in my mind, this commander was in a situation where he was about to lose control. He was going to lose control of his men. He was going to lose control of the situation. He was sick. He was tired of this war. And he was kind of just letting things happen in order to maintain any sense of his own self-control. So what I liked about the way David portrayed it and the way Lloyd wrote it is he was a much more complex character than just pure evil. And I think that's true in many of these real-world situations. People don't go in with ill intentions. It's the situation that often pushes them into the place of perpetrating evil unintentionally. Often people do really bad things for the right reasons, and often they do it because of circumstance and because of self-preservation. And more often, I think it's those cases than people actually being, there's not that many people that are born evil. There's not many people that are real sociopaths. They tend to become that way because of circumstance, because of things that have happened to them, because of, revenge, all sorts of different reasons. But particularly in wars, and I think we saw this, with so many of the situations with the Americans in Vietnam. I think we're seeing it, in Afghanistan and Iraq. You're seeing people put in extraordinary circumstances where they behave in ways they never normally would.
How come it's taken such a long time for this movie to get to us? I understand that it premiered at festivals like a year ago, and it's getting to us just now. What's going on?
I'm really slow. I had a pre-release version, basically. We were invited to Toronto. We were selected for Toronto before the film was finished. And I did a cut for them, sort of knowing that I would continue to work on it after I took to Toronto and got some audience response. And there was some really good feedback from that in terms of the level of brutality, in terms of clarity of some of the issues, certainly outside of Australasia, where we're much more familiar with not just this situation, but Pacific Island cultures in general. And I found out of that, I got some really good feedback and went back into editorial and just spent a lot longer on it than I originally intended. This is the first film I'd ever done without a release date. And normally you don't finish a film, you just have to stop because they're going to put it in the theater. In this case, I had the time to kind of keep playing and keep refining. And probably did that for about 6 months longer than I needed to. But that's basically it. I just kind of refined the film over time, and when I was ready, then decided to release it.
This film it's lyrical, and it has moments of brutality. There's balance in it. There's nuance. It is such a beautifully textured film, emotionally and dramatically. I'm very keen to know about the different worlds that you occupy when you're making a big film and when you're making a small, heartfelt film like this. You just mentioned how this is the first movie you've ever made without a release date.
Yeah, it's interesting. At one stage while I was making it, my DP, John Toon, who had done a number of more independent films, he actually said to me, what do you think the main difference is between working on a big film and a small film? And I said, the quality of the hotel rooms. It's not that different. The process you go through, the emotional process, to put it that way, is not that different. I guess the closest thing I could say is, when I've had to talk to schools or anything, and everyone sort of will ask, what do you think the most important skills you can bring to being a director? I say tenacity and empathy. It's the tenacity to keep beating your head against a wall, whether it's a creative wall during the writing, whether it's a logistic wall during the making of, whether it's financial wall of your budget. You're always fighting that. And the empathy comes from needing to understand your characters, your actors, what the gap is between them and what you need to help them to get there, and your crew. And, you need to really sort of be the conductor of this sort of very complex orchestra. And those things aren't different from a big film to a small film. It's just what your limitations are. On a small film, your limitations are more budgetary. On a big film, sometimes your limitations are the weight of the machine you're carrying around. But at the end of the day, I think it's the story that drives it. And that's the same on a big or a small film.
I'm very keen to know what you're working on now. Are you in the same avenue, or have you now toggled over to a big film?
No, I've actually deliberately left a blank space. I mean, I had intended to finish the film about 8 or 9 months ago, and just kind of kept going. And because of that, put everything else aside. I just said to my agents in LA and so on, look, I'm not even going to read anything until I'm really finished with this and happy with it. And I did, even after Prince Caspian, I sort of left a bit of blank space just to kind of let things grow. And even though I'd purchased this book, I hadn't necessarily intended it to be the next movie I did. And I want to do that again, just kind of leave a gap. And it may be something big. It may be a big studio film. It may be, drama. Or it may be something I shoot on my iPhone. I don't really know. I'm just sort of waiting for something to come to me, to be honest.
That really underscores how important this film was to you.
No, we're distracted from it. As I say, it was a complex film, and I just found at some point I didn't have the mental capacity to really embrace, anything else with any sort of creative intensity. And this is the other thing I did with this film, which I don't know that I'd do again, is I edited at home. I have theatre at home and had an Avid set up in my theatre, and I thought, well, this is great because it's taking me a lot of time. It means I'll spend more time at home. What it really means is I spent more time at work. And I would often, be in bed about to go to sleep at 2 a.m. or whatever and think, oh, I've got an idea, and we'd get up and go and cut. And I don't know that I'd ever do that again.
No, listen, now this is a big question that's a follow-up to something you said the last time that we spoke about blockbusters and making blockbusters in the 90s and working on the Batman films and how there was almost no limit or no ceiling or no restraint to what you could do. At the moment, Hollywood is going through a revision of how much they're spending on budgets. They're really pulling them back. Even producers like Jerry Bruckheimer are being told, you need to cut this budget down. We need to make these films cheaper. I'm just keen to just get a reflection from you, firstly, on what you think is going on in Hollywood now with big budget films and what it was like back in the 90s making these monster budget movies.
It was fun. It really was. I mean, I have to say that in terms of enjoyment in filmmaking, I had great fun on those Batman films. We could go in and pitch an idea of wouldn't it be great to have Batman and Robin falling out of an airplane and then riding the doors down as if they were airboards, and let's build a wind tunnel and motion capture people in the wind tunnel. And everyone's going, yeah, that sounds cool. And, definitely as budgets tightened, there was less of the, yeah, that sounds cool, and more of well, how much is that going to cost us? So it was certainly a lot of fun in the 90s. It was quite a heady time of making big action film. To some degree, if I look at my own films that I directed, I look back at Prince Caspian and go, did I really need to spend that much money? I mean, I love how epic the film is, but it was an expensive film. and it becomes harder and harder for a film to make back its money as you spend more and more on it, obviously. And the other thing that's changed, I think, in the film industry is since even the first Shrek, the unique thing about Shrek, and actually interestingly on Mr Pip, it's the first time I've seen that repeated, is when Shrek came out, we had a good, we were number one in the box office, we had a good weekend. Everyone was happy. But the really interesting thing is the second weekend was better. And that's unusual because so often, based on the first weekend now, they calculate what your movie's going to do over X amount of time, and then you're told straight away how long it's going to be in the theaters and what it's going to make. Word of mouth does not play into it as much. A very interesting thing that just happened in New Zealand, where Pip has already opened, is we saw an increase on the second weekend, which means, again, word of mouth is actually serving the film. But historically, recently, in the bigger films, they're very marketing-driven. And they've slowly gotten more and more akin, I think, to theme parks in the last, I would say, 5-10 years. But we're seeing that changing again now. I mean, we're seeing a greater interest in story, over spectacle, which also means that films aren't necessarily as expensive to make because they're relying on acting and so on rather than visual effects and spectacle. So I'm hoping actually, when I stepped away from Caspian, I was seeing this trajectory towards films getting bigger and bigger, fewer and fewer films being made with bigger and bigger budgets. And I just felt like stepping away from that and waiting for the industry to come around in another cycle as it does to where we were more story-based again. And that's kind of where I see it going again now.